Slavery in America first began in the early 17th century when European settlers in North America turned to African slaves as a less expensive source than indentured servants. After 1619, when a Dutch ship brought 20 Africans to the British colony in Jamestown, Virginia, slavery spread throughout the American colonies. Slavery was practiced throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, and African American slaves helped build the economy foundations of the new nation. As time went on, slavery in the North would not be as popular, but as slave labor was one of the fundamental principles that made most of the South's economy, slavery was a huge demand. Due to the fact that slaves were used to work plantations, cultivating tobacco, cotton, and other crops that would benefit the South's economy. The hard labor and torture would lead slaves to escape from the South, often escaping, dying, or being captured, trying to start a new life away from slavery. Out of many slaves who escaped, one managed to make a major impact in the U.S. history. Her name was Harriet Tubman.
Well, there were many people who did not believe in the practice of slavery in early America, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that changed how people viewed slavery in America, Frederick Douglass, who was a human rights leader in anti-slavery. Harriet Tubman was a woman who was a slave that took a stand against the abolishment of slavery in early America by escaping slavery and becoming an Underground Railroad conductor and a Civil War asset during the American Civil War.
Harriet Tubman experienced slavery because of the fact that she was born a slave. Her exact birth date is not accurate, although there are some speculations that she was born around the 1820s in Dorchester County, Maryland. Harriet's birth name was not Harriet Tubman, but in fact Armida Ross. She would take her mom's first name and husband's last name. As a slave, Harriet would have a lot of responsibilities during her childhood, in addition to household work. She had to do work at night to make sure her master's baby did not cry. She had to rock the baby's cradle or hold her in her arms. Every time a cry was heard, her mistress would whip her around the neck. These were her first scars that remained with her for the rest of her life. As the years went on, Harriet experienced a horrible accident that severely injured her. It started when Harriet was caught in the crossfire between a slave owner and its slave. The slave owner wanted to punish his slave, so the owner picked up a heavy iron weight and threw it at his slave. Except that instead of hitting his slave, the victim was Harriet Tubman. This accident almost crushed her skull and left Harriet with a deep scar, which caused her many seizures, severe headaches, and narcoleptic episodes throughout her lifetime. With all of the abuse and torture, Harriet would no longer tolerate this inhumane lifestyle and would escape, which led her to stand against slavery.
Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery in 1849, fleeing to Philadelphia. Following the illness and death of her owner in 1849, she set course on her way to freedom to Pennsylvania. Harriet made use of a known network as the Underground Railroad. She traveled nearly 90 miles to Philadelphia. She crossed into the free state of Pennsylvania with a feeling of relief, and one of her quotes was, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hand to see if I was the same person. There was such a glow over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields. I felt like I was in heaven." Another quote she said was, "I had crossed the line. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me into the free land. I was a stranger in a strange land." After getting her freedom from enslavement, Harriet returned to Maryland to save other members of her family, including her parents and some of her other brothers and sisters, and others to give them their freedom.
Harriet used the help of the Underground Railroad, which was a secret organization developed to aid runaway slaves on their escape to freedom. To be involved with the Underground Railroad was very dangerous and illegal. The term Underground Railroad referred to the entire system, which consisted of many routes called lines. The free individuals who helped runaway slaves travel to their freedom were called conductors. The fugitive slaves were referred to as cargo. Some of the conductors were white abolitionists, enslaved and free African Americans, and other activists to help slaves get their freedom. The safe houses used as hiding places along the lines of the Underground Railroad were called stations. Conductors helped runaway slaves by providing them with safe passage to and from stations. They did this under the cover of darkness, with slave catchers hot on their heels. Many times, stations would be located within their own homes or businesses. Knowing that joining the Underground Railroad would be the perfect way to stand up against slavery, Harriet would become a member or a conductor.
Around the time when Harriet became a member of the Underground Railroad, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act was passed. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 allowed the capture and return of the fugitive slaves to their rightful owners within the territories of the United States, and it was one of the 5 acts included in the Compromise of 1850. The act made escaping slaves move into Canada instead of the North United States. Harriet would travel at night when rescuing slaves and use safe houses. If a slave wanted to go back because she or he would not resist the journey, Harriet had to threaten them with a gun if they decided to go back. Harriet never lost a slave or allowed one to turn back, and 2 things that sustained her were a pistol and her faith in God. By 1856, Harriet's capture reward had been brought up to $40,000 from the South, but Harriet was never captured. Harriet is believed to have conducted approximately 300 people to freedom in the North Canadian Territory over a 15-year period. Harriet's actions would make her one of the most famous Underground Railroad conductors and would receive the nickname of Moses of her people because she led slaves to freedom in the North. Some of Harriet's famous quotes were, "I freed 1,000 slaves, and I could have freed 1,000 more, if only they knew they were slaves," which meant that some slaves Harriet met refused to be rescued and stayed in slavery. Another of her quotes was, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger," which meant that she was one of the few conductors that never lost her way leading slaves to freedom, and she never lost a slave she was rescuing.
Throughout her time in the Underground Railroad, Harriet encountered Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a prominent American abolitionist, author, and orator. Although some may say Frederick Douglass did more to abolish slavery with what he knew, such as giving speeches about abolishing slavery, Harriet Tubman would do more by risking her own life for the freedom of her people. In a letter from Frederick Douglass to Harriet Tubman, Frederick compliments Harriet's actions for freeing enslaved people and how she was a brave woman.
In 1861, when the American Civil War broke out, Harriet felt the need to help the Union Army, which would help her once more stand up and fight against the abolishment of slavery. Harriet's experience leading slaves along the Underground Railroad was especially helpful because she knew the South very well. Harriet was the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war. She guided the Combahee River raid under the command of Colonel James. The raid consisted of 300 African soldiers on 3 gunboats to disrupt southern supply lines by destroying bridges and railroads. The mission also liberated more than 7 enslaved Africans in South Carolina.
As the years passed, Harriet Tubman died of pneumonia at the age of approximately 93 years old on March 10, 1913. When Harriet died, she was buried with military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn. The city commemorated her life with a plaque on the courthouse.